When you're starting a story, your sort of first job in the beginning is to say, this is the field, these are the rules, these are the teams, go. Both the protagonist's character arc and that dangling question, that main conflict. And I think when you're marketing, you really want to start with what you're solving. You see the beginning of Nemo and you might go, oh, I was an overprotective parent too.
Welcome to the Growth by Creativity podcast, where we discuss the art of captivating storytelling, compelling design, and imaginative communication strategies through interviews and case studies with creative experts. Hope you enjoy and subscribe. Today, I'm joined by Dean Movshowitz. And Dean is a screenwriter, speaker, and author known for his #1 Amazon bestseller, Pixar Storytelling, Rules for Effective Storytelling based on Pixar's greatest films, which has been translated into several languages and is taught on campuses worldwide. He has spoken and given storytelling workshops at the BBC, Microsoft, the Boston Museum of Science, and other venues. As a screenwriter, Dean has worked on TV projects for Disney Junior, CineTV, Black Pills, and UFA. He is currently in development as a co-creator on sci-fi and young adult series for CineTV and working on a new book. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Caroline, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, Dean. So, you have an impressive background and, given our audience, B2B marketers, predominantly in software, this is a topic that we get asked a lot, which is the topic of storytelling. Could you give us just like a brief overview of what storytelling actually is, since it's quite a buzzword right now?
I often think of storytelling as organizing a series of events, whether fictional or real, in a way that creates meaning, right? When you're listening to someone tell you about their day and you're like, okay, is this going somewhere? Is there a point? That means they're just giving you the events without the meaning. What storytellers do is they take events or facts or, anything that might be dry or neutral, but they put them together in a way that creates meaning or emotion or a call for action, right? Meaning can mean a lot of different things, but at its core, it's rearranging these data points, if you want to call them that, to create that effect.
Awesome. So in terms of storytelling elements, are there certain things that must be included for it to be considered a story? Is there like specific ingredients, so to speak?
I mean, I don't love being so definitive and prescriptive, especially, I come from film and TV, and some things get experimental and sometimes they go over my head, but other people swear by them. But in my opinion, if you want an engaging story, and again, the book I wrote is about Pixar, and Pixar is a very specific, broad, exciting, engaging, very emotional, very compelling kind of storytelling. I think there are two basic things that you need. The first one we've already mentioned, right? Meaning. It all needs to sort of lead towards a certain point. But at its core, it needs to feel like a soccer game. You need to have two teams in every story. And they can be very broad, Iron Man, Thanos, James Bond, a Bond villain, whatever. But it can also be simpler than that. It could be, two forces inside one person. It could be grief and hope, and we're watching the movie to see which one will prevail. Sometimes, in stories that are a little less emotional, it could be just a kind of dangling question, right? In a soccer game, it's like, who will win? It could be, who done it. It might be who the killer is, right? But you need to have one dangling question. You need to have a sort of, I don't want to say binary, but you need to be able to pick a team and root for it. And that's also, not to get into that, where stories can become dangerous when you sort of move to the political global level. But when you're telling a story, you want to have sort of two teams, or you want to have someone to root for, or you want to have a question that will be answered one way or another to keep people engaged. To stick with the soccer analogy, when you're starting a story, your sort of first job in the beginning is to say, this is the field, these are the rules, these are the teams, go. Obviously, in feature films, it can get, more complicated than that. Maybe you want to save this detail for later, or maybe you want to pretend this is X and reveal it to be Y. But especially in quicker stories, or unless you have a strong dramaturgical reason to hide a detail for later, you want to set up your audience to know what the game that's about to play is going to be.
So when you're screenwriting, is this the first thing you're thinking about? Like, before you even start writing a story, what are the two forces, so to speak?
So really, with screenwriting, it starts with an idea. It starts with something that sounds exciting. It sounds, maybe it's a question about emotions or relationships, or maybe it's a cool idea, or maybe it's, if you're working in genre, it could be like, oh, it pisses me off that in these movies, this always happens. I'm going to write something to correct that. And then you sort of percolate with it for a moment. And you wait to see if it's viable, or you wait to see what suggests itself to be added to it. I will usually not move to an outline before I have at least some idea of what it's about. What is the meaning? Not the plot, what it's going to try to say, what it's going to try to convey, But let's say, it percolated, I have a good idea about what it is. Then the next step would be sitting down and getting a general idea of like, what are the main events in the story? There's like 3 to 4, you can call them plot points, ascending into the climax. There's like these 4 or 5 stops that you need to have in a feature film for it to feel viable and full. And those obviously hinge on this conflict, this main conflict. You want to be able to look at those main points and see both the protagonist's character arc and that dangling question, that main conflict, and how he gets ahead, gets back, gets ahead, gets back, and eventually it's resolved in this manner.
A lot of people listening in today are marketers. How would you advise them to think about storytelling for marketing initiatives? Do you have any tips on how to even get started with this?
The first 2 things that come to mind, both in classic mythology stories, Joseph Campbell wrote a lot about it, Joseph Vogel wrote a lot about it, and you can see it really, really well in Pixar movies. There's often a flaw in the world, right? In Monsters, Inc., they're saying that kids aren't scared anymore, they're running short on electricity. In WALL-E, the whole world is destroyed and whatever. In Inside Out, it gets trickier because everything starts to be sad, but also joy kind of says, I don't know what sadness's role is. And we kind of tuck that away and forget about it, but it's clear there's some dysfunction. The entire story is the journey of acknowledging that dysfunction and then figuring out how to solve that dysfunction, often through change, growth, and sacrifice. And I think when you're marketing, you really want to start with what you're solving. We call it the flaw in the world. I think in that story, you really want to, whether you're casting yourself as a protagonist or, your audience as a protagonist, you want to talk about what is the flaw in the world you're setting out to solve. And again, most of the epic stories or most of the epic, let's say more Hollywood broader stories are about a hero who is the only person who could solve the flaw in this world, right? And I think if you can create a story that puts you as the person with the exact right combination of skills, right person, right time to solve this flaw in the world, I think that's a lot of the game. I think that's a big part of it. So I think there's 2 ways where we connect with characters. And I think of them as one I call like the aspirational way to connect with a character, and one I think as the vulnerable way to connect with a character. And the aspirational one is what you might see in rom-coms, where we see characters who are more attractive than us and smarter than us, and they have a cool job, and we want to be like them and whatever. And maybe they get some, they're clumsy. They get some like tiny flaw just so they're not perfect. And we enjoy that because we get to walk in those shoes for a moment, or it's like, wishful thinking or escapism. And that works. But I think what Pixar does to create sort of a more enduring, a deeper, a more emotional connection is they make us connect with characters through vulnerability. We see, and they really show in the beginning of each of their movies, the flaws their character have, right? You see the beginning of Nemo and you might go, oh, I was an overprotective parent too, when this or this happened. You can see the beginning of Toy Story and be like, oh, I was afraid of rejection too, like Woody is afraid of being rejected by Andy. So you make this connection that isn't about wishful thinking. It's about admitting your fears. It's admitting what you actually really, really, really want and not sure you're going to get. And I think that leads to a deeper connection. So I think as marketers, you want to keep those 2 tactics in mind and strike the right balance with them. I think you want to be a little bit vulnerable when talking about your journey, about your story, about what you want. I think people appreciate honesty. I think part of why Pixar's stories work so well is because they end up on a positive message. But that positive message work because they really, really show us the counter argument, right? It's easy to say in up, oh, you need to let go of the past and move away from your grief. But that would be superficial and pat if they didn't break our heart first, if they didn't show how hard it is to do that. Because when you're honest about how hard it is, then moving on is meaningful and real and emotional. So I think when you're telling your story or when you're pitching a story to someone, you want to have the counter theme. You want to have a vulnerable part in you there, because I think people connect to that, at least in storytelling. I think it could also depend on the client. I can imagine clients who maybe don't want that, right? It's always about knowing your audience. Pixar knows their audience. They're trying to get something that reaches children and adults, and they want to be good for critics. It needs to be an action, a comedy, and everything. So there's things they do and things they can't do. You need to know your audience and to figure out if they will respond more to the aspirational connection or to the vulnerable connection.
And that definitely makes sense. I'm wondering, not to put you on the spot, but a lot of the clients and a lot of the folks listening in today are B2B marketers for software companies. And I'm just
Mhm.
trying to connect the dots in terms of, how do you express that vulnerability? Like, do you say, well, prior to using our software, these are all the challenges you face. And, after using our software, this is the better day. Like, is the vulnerability more so like the experience you feel prior to purchasing the thing? Or should the software companies also share, for instance, their challenges developing the software? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think, and it's not exactly marketing, I know, but when you think of someone like Steve Jobs, so much of the myth around him, of the myth of Apple, is Apple's failure. Now, it's easy to say that now because we're seeing it all in retrospect, right? I don't know if in present time it would have helped, but I think when you're crafting the story of how we reached for this moment, right? There's a moment where I am standing in front of you, trying to get you to buy something, trying to get you to like my company. I think the story that led to this moment can't be fully linear. It can't be, oh, I had this idea, I made it, done, boom, here, buy my thing. You want to create a story that feels a little more mythical, because you want to invite the audience member to join in something big. I feel like, and this is where I get a bit torn about storytelling as a buzzword, like you said in the beginning. Sometimes you just want to get someone to buy your product. You don't need to make them feel like they're changing the world. But that is something that a lot of tech companies in Silicon Valley trade on, right? Almost everyone pitch themselves, at least in public. I don't know how they do it in B2B or inside their own rooms, but there's a lot of this, like, we're doing something important. We're going to change the world. We're making the world a better place, right? And maybe for some reason, if you, not every person in the world cares about that, and it's fine. But I think you want to pick the value you're fighting for. You want to make the fight for it not seem easy, right? You want to feel like you sacrificed something for it, like you had skin in the game. And then you want to invite someone to join that fight. Now, when you're picking that value, that guiding value, that's an important decision, because the people who will join you, the people who will sell to you, they will want to partake in that value. And if you pick a value that they won't respond to, you will lose some people, right? I think you need to be okay with losing some people. I think when we think about brands that we love, there are at least some people who are alienated by them. And you really want to create a story that will get people very, very excited and loyal and will not be able to think about quitting you, assuming you deliver the goods, of course, because they love their relationship with the product, with the company, and know that maybe some people won't respond to that value you pick. Obviously, you want to pick broad values, relatable values, right? We're not doing niche, unless some people do that. That's fine. But obviously, the audience market shares in relation to that. In screenwriting, when you're pitching an idea or a series or something to a studio, you're not just telling them the story of the story. You're giving them the story of why you need to make this story now and why I am the only person who can write it. That's really what I mean, right? And I think it's better to come to that from saying, oh, I've struggled with X and this script is my way of dealing with that. Or I was curious about X and this script is my way of dealing with that. Or this script is missing from the world. This story is missing for the world because of ABC. So you're selling a package that isn't just like, here, this will make you money. Here, this is something that's missing in the world. And I, due to my life circumstances, my decisions, my talents, my goals, my value, am the right person to do it. That's the sort of structure I think you might be looking for. And I can easily see it being applied to a software and how you came to make that software, what were your decisions to make that software, what obstacles you overcome in making that software. What do you think the specific relationship will yield to both of you, to the world? I definitely think it's applicable. I think sometimes I can't imagine people who might be like, okay, don't give me all this fluff, just tell me what it'll do and how much it'll cost, right? And that's where I think as marketers, or especially as in one-on-one interactions, you need to know your audience and you need to sort of be more light on your feet. But I think you want to have those narratives, those values, those stories in your back pocket.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something that we've been telling our clients, because we get asked a lot, well, how do we incorporate storytelling into our marketing initiatives? And so something that we've been sharing with our clients and prospects is, hey, the case studies you have when you actually ask for a review or a testimonial or a success story with one of your clients using your software, that can be a great starting point to start a story. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a good idea to get started? Do you have any other thoughts?
I think it's great to incorporate, these testimonials or these proof of value, proof of success. I think it's crucial to use them when you're telling your story. As a storyteller, I'm not sure exactly where they go, right? Because you're kind of giving away the ending in a way if you open with them. So I think maybe a sort of middle ground, a way to balance that is to open with part of the testimonial. we were working with a lemonade stand, and 6 months after we worked with them, Obama showed up there. And then you go like, oh, how did that happen? And then you sort of save how that happened to the end, and you go back to introducing yourself and your method of work and what you think, what is the problems you set out to fix. And here's how we did that with, that lemonade stand. So I think that's my immediate response for it. Again, I don't like being too prescriptive because I think, I had a teacher who said that the way to write a masterpiece is to know exactly which rule you need to break. And I think when you're telling a story or crafting a story, if you're intentional, if you're really sitting down and contemplating what every beat will do to your audience, right? What is the expected response you want what is the feeling and the thought and the expectation you want your audience to have at every beat, then you're doing your job. And you can put anything you want in the middle, end, beginning, whatever, if you know what you're trying to do and you're intentional about it. So you can open with a testimonial. I think a testimonial makes a lot of sense to include as, proof of your success. But I think behind that, I think there's sort of two, when you're thinking about selling or thinking about marketing, I think there's two different things you're trying to do, right? One is the logical part of it, right? This is why this is worth your money. This is why you can trust me. I'm not, this is why I'm successful. And you obviously need that. That needs to be incorporated for them to sign at the end of the contract. But I think you also need to make them want to sign. Whether you have the goods or not, right? You want to get them to sign. You want them to want to believe you. You want them to want you to be successful. You need them to want you to be a good fit. And obviously, they may not like you, but it makes sense financially on their side, and they may like you and it won't make sense. They'll decide to gamble or get fooled by you or whatever. But I think those are two different goals, and there's some overlap, there's some similar tools, but it's worth thinking what are you using to achieve each. So I think testimonials are great for the logic part. Here's why you can trust me. Rest assured. You're not just making an emotional decision, you're being responsible. I think when we're talking about storytelling, we're talking much more about the other part of getting them to want to trust you, to want you to be good, to want you to make sense for them.
So it sounds like mystery and having, not everything sort of thrown out and displayed right off the bat is something to keep in mind, right? Just to keep a little bit of that mystery so that you're pulling that thread so that you keep people engaged, and to have them read, in this example, the full case study or the full testimonial or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I mean, almost all stories, one way to think of stories is just how you dole out information, right? The easiest example is Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad. Sorry for the spoiler if you've been under a rock for the past 50 years. You know that from day one, even though there's this one line in the first Star Wars that makes you go, did he plan this or was he making it up as he go? But let's assume he didn't. You save that one piece of information for 2 movies to give it a maximum effect. In any story, there's that kind of what do you tell your audience when? And really, when you're watching a movie, you're watching it to get an answer to a question. It can either be an outcome question: will the couple get back together? Will good defeat evil? Will Frodo make it to Mount Doom to destroy the ring? And sometimes it is a curiosity question. And this is something that mystery movies do a lot. TED Talks do this a lot. They start with like this opening dangling question, and then you just want to hear the end of it. It's a very technical trick to keep people engaged. And it really sparks curiosity. How many times have you watched a movie you weren't enjoying just to get an answer, just to see who the killer is, So it's less emotional, but it keeps people hanging on your story.
Dean, in terms of favorite stories that come to mind, whether it's a movie, a book, what is your favorite story?
What is my favorite story? Wow. To maybe complicate what I've been saying so far, I often think of Catch-22 as one of the best books ever written, and one of the books that it's nearly impossible to adapt to a movie because so much of it is the language. And if I talked earlier about breaking rules to make a point or a meaningful point, I think Catch-22 does that. I don't remember all of the plot in it. I don't quite remember how it ends, to be honest. But what you remember from it is the futility of language where nothing means anything, the futility of trying to impose logic, right? And so you don't have the classic Pixar story that I described. You don't have those necessarily 4 to 5 plot points to describe, even though I'm sure if I went back and broke it down, there would be 3 acts, there would be an escalation, there would be some of that. I haven't read it in a while, so I may be very, very wrong. But what I remember from it is the way it used language, situation, character, logic to show you how you couldn't find logic, you couldn't find meaning, you couldn't find order in war or in the army. And I think that's a great example of breaking rules and using sort of, let's say, less conventional or less Hollywood classic blockbustery storytelling rules because you had a different point to make, right? Catch-22 couldn't end like a Pixar movie where you grow and sacrifice and make sense and everything's okay and you heal the world. That would be completely the opposite of what that book is trying to do.
So, Dean, with all of this talk about Gen AI, how do you think this is going to play out? Like, what are your thoughts on the whole Gen AI and storytelling using artificial intelligence? Like, what are your general thoughts on that and where we're going?
I mean, I'm no expert, so I can't talk about it too much. It was a very, very, very big point of contention in the recent Writers Guild strike in Hollywood and the ongoing Screen Actors Guild strike. As a storyteller, I'm not that worried. You've seen these examples, and again, famous last words. You saw those examples like I have generated like South Park episode based on a prompt, and I've seen or heard producers use it to generate material for a project they're on. But you need to feed it. You'd have to feed it. You have to pick and choose from its examples. It doesn't have judgment. It can give you material that if you sift through, you can get good stuff out. It's not in a position to write something whole. And maybe that means that in 10 years, your job in Hollywood is to rewrite a script you got from you. So that's okay. I don't see, from what I've been seeing so far, and again, not an expert on tech or AI, I don't see anything that relates like that ability to tell a full cohesive story. But even if it could do that, I genuinely wonder how many people would be interested in that. Maybe it could do the Hollywood blockbusters, the action movies, the franchise stuff. But I do think that in the back of our minds, when we go to watch something that's a little more about humans, right? It's a little more about love and life and passion and happiness and whatever, we want to get the feeling that someone wrote that from their life experience. We want to get the feeling someone wrote it from their heart. That's why in all those interviews with writers or with actors or with filmmakers, they're always talking about how it affected them. We like that narrative. I don't think that a lot of people will be genuinely excited to watch. Can you imagine watching a rom-com from someone who's never been in love, who's never had sex? I don't think it could generate a kind of insight that moves us. And even if it could, I don't think we would necessarily want to buy it. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, and it's going back to what you were saying earlier that, when you're presenting a story, you were mentioning that when you go to present your story for a movie or whatever, that it's not just that you're selling the story, but why you are the best person to sell that story. So it kind of ties back to the story behind the story in a way, right?
Exactly.
Dean, so you mentioned that you do workshops, you've worked with the BBC and universities. What is the theme of those workshops? What do you talk about?
It kind of changes again based on the audience. When it's more with a film, TV, narrative oriented audience, I'll talk sort of more nuts and bolts of like screenwriting, or whether it's a feature or a TV series, sort of finding those main big beats and constructing a story together. The broader one, or like sort of my classic go-to presentation, which I sort of jokingly call How Pixar Makes Us Cry, is kind of like what we were talking here. It sort of goes down to these four core elements or four core things you really need to get someone engaged in a story. And we covered most of them, right? You need to care about a character. You need to put them through an ordeal. You need to make them transform somehow in a way that generates meaning, right? So in those presentations, I will talk more about how Pixar does each of those in a way that's sort of more broadly applicable to any kind of story. And then if you're talking more about workshops or coaching, then it's just me sitting with a person or a group of people and sort of working with them on whatever they're working on and seeing how they can use some of these tools in crafting their story and crafting their narrative. And we can sort of meet in the middle. Me with that sort of Americanized Pixar-y structures, and then with the sort of business side, and together creating something that has the best of both worlds.
Dean, thank you so much for your time today and for all your insights on storytelling. If folks listening in today want to learn more about you, where should they go?
I think the best place is my website, deanmovshowitz.com. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, but not very active there. Like, they're more personal accounts. You can find the book on Amazon or on my website. Yeah, pretty much that.
Awesome. And we will make sure to drop that in the captions under so people can find you easily.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dean.
It was great.